Well, hello again, everybody out there from around the world. I'm here with my coffee as usual, as is David. He might be drinking tea, though, as he's in the city of London in merry old England, and I'm here in Detroit in the US of A. And we're continuing on our quest to improve our questions and to provide riddles that could be useful to try and contemplate looking into the future. And so that's basically our approach here. It's presumptuous to say what is truth and then try to give somebody the answer. And even our Lord didn't do that when confronted by Pontius Pilate, who asked him what is truth. He said nothing. And that was the ultimate answer. Greetings from Holland, I see. I don't know how many people are going to join in, but they eventually get around to watching it in the replay anyways. As always, there's a great deal of information available below the podcast. If you want to find out more about myself or Reverend David William Parry, our interesting Quagan pastor, and he's formed an alliance, and that's a wonderful thing. That it's ultimately a quest for the universally human, is the way Rudolf Steiner had expressed it, and coming from his vantage point, although he's not inclined to make definitions, but rather to continually approach a subject from a different perspective. And because things that are true today won't be true the same way in the future. Likewise, they're not the same as they were in the past, because we're in a continually evolving universe. And so that's rendered it like kind of an insuperable barrier, we may call it, for the interpretation of the ancient legends and the epic poetry and all of that, when you try to take the modern mindset and try to unlock the secrets that are hidden within these ancient myths, legends, fairy tales, sagas, all of that, of which is an expression, according to Rudolf Steiner, of the initiatic content of our ancestors. And so they could serve as riddles, and these riddles have been recast in modern times by great figures like Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and his wonderful fairy tale of the green snake and the beautiful lily, for example, or with Friedrich von Hardenberg, the poet novelist, representing it in the Disciples of at Sias, or in his little story of the blue flower, so that these archetypal images that are presented artistically, such as the drama by Goethe as Faust, or Schiller's William Tell, all of these things are conveying important content to us. And even in the visual arts, you see that the profound role played by the Gothic cathedrals during the period of the Knights Templar in the Middle Ages that created the agrarian culture that was the bedrock of the evolution of European culture. And so the more we can dig into these things and try to understand them, the better off we'll be. It's I don't know, like this week I just kept going back to the ideas about color by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and it's like Johann Wolfgang von Goethe said, color is the dance between light and darkness. And on another vantage point, Rudolf Steiner said, we think with the head, and the heart feels the light or darkness of the thought. And so in exploring these things, it's to try and allow them to work in us in a way that creates a meditative mood of soul. And there was this great artist, Lane Colette d'Herbois, and she was like an only child of a Scottish mother and a French aristocratic father. She was like born in 1907 and grew up near Tintagel, which is the site of the Arthurian Center in Cornwall on the west coast of England. And so she was able to come into a strong relationship with nature, but she ended up becoming a deep student of watercolor and the landscapes of Turner and other great painters. And then she ended up working with special needs children and developing methods of working with therapy through painting. And she ended up gaining a very wide education through her relationship with Dr. Ida Wegman of the Arlesheim Clinic, and they collaborated. And there were two doctors that she worked with, Dr. Ida Wegman and Dr. Hilma Walter, who both had worked directly with Rudolf Steiner, and she was able to work with the idea of color as a means of therapy for those who are challenged, but also for anyone. And it brings to mind a story I mentioned, but I think I told it a long time ago. But one of my mentors was Werner Glass, the direct student of Walter Johannes Stein, the great Grail researcher and author of the 9th century World History in the Light of the Holy Grail, which is the really kind of, in a sense, the precursor to my book, The Arcana of the Grail Angel. But Werner was working in England at the time as a teacher. He ended up becoming the leader of Waldorf education in North America, and he considered my good friend Douglas Gabriel his right hand. But when he was a younger man, he had taken on such a heavy burden, and he went to an anthroposophical doctor, and he was trying to figure out how he could get past the stress and find the energy because of all the tasks that he had allotted to himself. And the doctor told him to go to the museum and look at the watercolors of Turner meditatively, for an hour whenever he can get away. And so he proceeded to do that, and he was able to work through his work schedule and end up taking upon further initiatives beyond what it appeared to be too great a burden, so that there's this power that exists within the realm of nature that people have to be able to open themselves up to. We get so deep into our analytical mind and the brain-bound thinking that we forget the curative possibilities that exist just from sitting and quiescently meditating on the beauty of a tree. And that's one of my favorite ways of looking at it. And given the therapeutic approach of Lane d'Herbois, she did so much emphasis on the color green. And green is the color of the heart, really. But the after image of green is, of course, magenta. And magenta is in green, that interplay, and coming to an understanding of the idea of complementary colors is an important thing that one can work with. And then when you get into the concept of the way in which Goethe observed color, which was so different from the analytical approach of Isaac Newton. And you can go to my YouTube channel, and you can find I have a folder in there on Goethean science, and then included in there is this wonderful video done on Goethe's theory of color. But in getting to understand, he said that colors, if you observe colors light through a prism, you'll see that the colors arise around the edges of things, which is something that's really quite remarkable, because if you get into understanding some of the content of Rudolf Steiner's spiritual science, where he talks about elemental beings arising when there's a separation, there's like this from one thing and another, between the rocks and the water, or on the shore. That's where you find the outpouring of elemental activity so strong. And then if you get in the bloodstream itself, and you get into the idea of what's called the easy zone in water, the exclusion zone that was discovered by that professor out in California at the university in the Bay Area. He said that there's this exclusion zone. He noted from observing water that when water comes up against the surface, the surface tension changes so that there's no particulates in the immediate area surrounding the surface, and that's a key. So I've been meditating the last few days on what is the relationship between this outpouring of colors and the exclusion zone in fluids, which also includes the blood, which of course is a fluid, and then the outpouring of elemental beings where the points of contrast between different manifestations of nature, between the rocks in the air, or the water in the air, the sylphs dancing above the sea, with the undines, and that whole living view of reality that was so real for the inhabitants of Europe, of Northern Europe. The Rudolf Steiner had indicated that they had maintained the old clairvoyance longer than other cultures because they had not developed an intellectual culture, and that the great initiates that were the inspirations for that culture, you have the one called Wotan or Odin, who was actually a very significant bodhisattva, and then you have the master of wisdom that goes by the name of Sig or Sigga or Sigurd. And so when you start getting into the mysteries that were founded by Sig in Northern Europe, and then the mysteries that he founded in Ireland at the Sun Mystery Center, and the Mystery Center he founded on the shores of the Black Sea, that Rudolf Steiner had indicated that the individual who would later become the Saint Francis that we all know so well had spent time being inspired by this bodhisattva. And so that there's so much mystery lore encoded that it overjoys me when I find people discovering some of the things that I've found. But I don't want to be forceful with anybody. That's their thing. If they want to find some kind of abstract way to interpret the Bible so that they say, oh, well, it's actually just an allegory about the zodiac. Well, there is a zodiacal allegory within the Bible. There's no question. It has that level, but that's just one level. There's a near infinite, or perhaps infinite, level of possibility that even Hegel himself said that it was, and I paraphrase, it's impossible to get to the bottom of the levels of meaning that can be found within the Bible. And likewise, it's that way, and it's challenging because people are so intellectual to get into some of the myths that are available from Northern Europe. The Kalevala of the Finns, for example, or the myths of Sig that Richard Wagner was to encode into his dramas, his operas, that he was attempting to poetically represent, and that Rudolf Steiner said he'd succeeded more with the music that he created than with his poetic representation, but that he was working towards that. And Rudolf Steiner said that if somebody makes a mistake regarding the nature of the supersensible, that's okay, because at least they're striving for the supersensible. That's the important thing, even if they get it all wrong. And so that kind of leaves us with a sigh of relief, because as many of you already know, I consider Rudolf Steiner's work to be the most difficult study that one can approach. And so when you get into the elder Edda and the younger Edda of the Viking lore or the Kalevala, and you start trying to get into understanding these things, that they work in you in a very mysterious way, so that you have to give yourself enough psychological space to be able to enter into it in clarity. And one of the keys to understanding the idea of the ending of that culture was that it was a waiting culture, because it didn't have the intellectual content. Its intellectual stream was musical, and that came to develop the impulses towards having intellectual culture much later on, with mathematics and science and orchestral music with Beethoven and Bach and all these amazing manifestations. But Rudolf Steiner had said that capacity of conveying the ancient mysteries through music by the being who in some incarnations was called Scythianos, that this created an inherent capacity towards the unfolding of an understanding of science and mathematics in the future. So that you have to see that these are planting seeds, and that you could study this in this lifetime, and then you'll find that it may not be until your next lifetime that you have a fruition of those studies. So you have to leave yourself open, but know that the central mystery of the North is the mysteries of courage.
That caught me. Yeah, evening all. I'm at the moment. I'm wishing there were more intellectual cultures. People are fighting in gas stations across Britain at the minute. I mean, physically fighting, because there are rumours that there will be petrol shortages. So, of course, panic buying is managing to make petrol shortages. And I was just watching a minute ago with my partner, people physically fighting on petrol station forecourts. So I don't want to attack intellectual cultures in the least. I wish a few more would start, and people got a decent education and realise they're letting themselves down and making a pig's ear. And the North Europe, and Britain technically is North Europe. I mean, the weird Corbynites, like, deluding themselves that it's some sort of extreme west of Europe. No, it's north. It's that simple. It's north. Because they don't like the associations that go with the North grow up. Yeah, I mean, I wish there were a few more Goethes and Hegels and Wagner's, because at the moment we need all of that. I've noticed how brutish things are increasingly getting. I posted a meme. I'm sorry, I'm old enough to enjoy posting memes. I know that's the most uncool thing imaginable nowadays, but there was just one I discovered about Aleister Crowley. At the end of the day, Aleister Crowley's a black magician. The end. But it was funny. The text, he was dressed as some sort of ancient Egyptian high priest, and the meme read, "Doing coke and reading Aleister Crowley does not mean you're a magician." And, and of course it's true, but there are lots of people that think it does. So I couldn't resist posting that. Oh yeah, we live in alchemical times. I mean, it was always darkest before the dawn. I think if we look at the old alchemists, they worked on tuition and prayer. That unless you're a mere souffleur, as the French would say, and you think it's all about chemicals and vials and bottles, and it is partly, but not simply that. Yeah, I mean, the task of making gold always struck me as turning the ego into soul. We need a bit more of that nowadays. We need a bit more Hegel. Sort of hyper educated people basically causing a pain in the ass and saying, by the way, you can do it too if you choose to. We need a bit more of that. I don't know. I feel dispirited, John, for all sorts of reasons. As I showed you just up here, I'm reading again volume 2 of the Decline of the West by Oswald Spengler. I'm sorry, I don't think he's a nationalist. Just because you think, I know everybody hates that, nobody wants to take that on board. Just because you believe cultures are super organisms, it doesn't make you a nationalist. And he was so rude. I mean, people forget that, or they haven't read it. So rude about Germans and right-wing German politics. I mean, it surprises me that people do still hold on to that. Yeah, I'm feeling, I don't know. We need a few more Quagans. We need a few more people trying to bridge gaps at the minute. I mean, I'm tempted at our little church to start reading circles. You know, I made a joke about them. Was it last week or the week before? You know, the low church middle class intellectuals. I'm not middle class. I'm working class. Working class. I don't know what that means in America. I'm not sure what it means here anymore. But you know, it's a good thing to say. You know, when they Unitarians and Baptists, when Baptists still had an education, unlike nowadays, they go. The minister and his gossipy wife would go to these terrible, terrible gin houses and the worst parts of industrial development to start reading circles and Sunday schools. We need a bit more of that. You know, we need the church to do something. You know, why the church is empty? Because they want you to swallow a doctrine as opposed to lead a life. Why did Jesus not answer Pontius Pilate? What is truth? I like what Kierkegaard said about that. He has the truth stood in front of him. The truth isn't a series of assertions, like a counter series of assertions or a third series of assertions or a different series of assertions. If it's only that, then we've not got the truth, and it's just argumentation leading to further dispute. And why not? Because that's one of the way human beings learn. But maybe goodness, beauty, and truth, if we're looking at the classic virtues, aren't simply that, and they're modalities of being. They're a modus of being. Therefore, there was no way Jesus needed to answer that because it was stood in front of Pontius Pilate. I rather like that one. But you know, who's looking for all of that these days? That's my deep worry. I spent the week. We're getting towards the Nephilim conference next Saturday. We're getting some very populist elements. Hey, yeah, I can be highbrow. I can also be Barnum from Barnum and Bailey. We've got to sell seats. So I've been looking at the sort of lowbrow. Isn't that a terrible phrase? I've been looking at the lowbrow elements of what we're doing, you know, comic books, monsters, and arriving very rapidly at the depressing realization that what a lot of people are doing nowadays is actually confusing fantasy with some sort of spiritual life. And of course, if there's one thing that's going to stop them ever realizing their own potentials, their own powers, their own God-given glories, is if you think you're Captain America. You know, there's nothing wrong with Captain America, but if you really think you're Captain America, by the way, you're not, it's a fictional character. Or if you think you're the Hulk, or if you think you're Spider-Man, by the way, you're not the Hulk and Spider-Man. You know, they're comic book characters. You know, we've been looking at Comic-Cons because one of the ideas is that when we all convene again next year for hang on, I've got to what's it called again? Nakanook 22. What we might try and do is put a comic book together. You know, what are the Nephilim? For me, I'll be honest, and I don't know what that particular biblical mystery means. I mean, it's very, very deep Hebraic, mystical, magical material. I'm not sure that you can really get into that without knowing a huge amount of Hebrew folklore, Hebrew angelology. I'm not sure you can really get on top of that. I might be wrong. I'm open to suggestions. But, you know, that's not really the area of either Christianity, Quakerism, or Quakery I'm looking at. For me, they're sort of giant issues. They're giant problems. You know, shades of Swedenborg, you know, giant injustice giant mercilessness. I mean, you're looking at that sort of thing, I think. So anyway, we're thinking of getting some illustrations together of big muscled monsters and maybe selling a few. Hey, it's a fundraiser. But so it's made me realise things that are depressing me. People fighting on petrol stations because they don't know any better, and everything sinking to its lowest possible level. Isn't that Julius Evola? Everything has to sink to its lowest possible level, and a willful disregard of education. Of course, I'm speaking about Britain. I'm not speaking about anywhere else. For the simple reason people can't see what good it's doing them. And if you look at the problems of educators, people forget there's that side of it too. I mean, to keep body and soul together as a free church minister, most of my life I've had other jobs as well, and one of them was teaching for years. And I started teaching special needs way back in the days of yore, and it was magical. We do things like road signs. Let's use that color here, and what does that shape mean? It was magical. It was also heartbreaking, which is why I got more into mainstream education. I enjoyed teaching English as a foreign or second language for years. It was real fun, but there are limitations to that. If the willful resistance to education comes from, in this country, I'm not talking about anywhere else at all, burnt out teachers who are poorly paid, abysmally treated as a profession, and basically disrespected not only by the powers that be governmentally, but also by the parents of the families of the people they're teaching. So there's not much incentive on the one hand. And secondly, people know they're being force-fed in Britain material to give them a job. So it's not about self-improvement, it's not about depth, it's not about stimulation. Hurrah for Rudolf Steiner schools. I mean, and they're under threat in Britain because everybody's got to be educated the same way, even though everybody knows it's not working. That is disgusting. Encouraging the imagination, encouraging art, encouraging creativity, all that's got to stop. So we can all be educated badly. I mean, people know at the back of their minds that, in the tier system here, there's something called GCSEs, ordinary level education. So in other words, you can be trusted to handle cash in a shop as opposed to sort of sweep the roads. And there are something called A levels. So you can manage a department of people who can handle cash. And there's a degree. So you're the manager of the people that can run departments of people who handle cash. There's no idea of self-discovery or the richness of human knowledge. That doesn't exist. So I'm a down David today. I confess it. I'll hand back to you, I promise. Giant ignorance is and the Nephilim that I'm focusing on at the minute, because he seems to be getting his way. With people fighting on forecourts and letting themselves down, and the country falling apart on a weekly basis. Now there are going to be food shortages because, of course, all the different countries in Europe. I was one of the very few people, I'll put that differently, saying, by the way, the Brexit discussions, no one's including the idea of liberty. So it's a trade-off then between different types of gangster. No one. The Brexiteers weren't mentioning it. The anti-Brexiteers weren't mentioning it. And surprise, surprise, it's turned into an even worse stew of political intrigue than anyone ever dared to think. So all the different countries now have different regulations about COVID and injections. Lorry drivers either can't keep up with it or they've had enough. So there might be food shortages at Christmas. And it just goes on and on and on. And where does it end? What's the cure? A decent education and respecting each other as human beings. But that's very, very far from the agenda over here. So a depressed David will hand back to my wonderful American friend.
Well, yeah, from my observation, 3 countries that are doing better than others regarding this peculiar dilemma we're in is Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. and they've chosen to treat it as a normal seasonal challenge and leave it at that. And I don't want to get into that whole dialogue because these things are allowed but not permitted. And I see no point in getting my channel taken down. So let's not go there. There's plenty of places you can find that information, thank God, but it's not here due to the constraints. But fortunately for us, we're focusing on those things that point towards a future, and I continually make the point that don't forget prayer, and that is the thing that can empower you to participate in this whole drama as a conscious being. And Rudolf Steiner had made the point that World War I took place because of the lowered consciousness of a few dozen people. And when you think about what that means, he referred to them as the sleepwalkers, that they kind of just like walked into that whole nightmare. And when you get into what does he mean by lowered consciousness? Well, there's plenty of ways you can lower your consciousness. One of them is the pub. That's an obvious one. The other one is watching too much telly, as they call it in the UK, especially when you only got pretty much one channel and it's run by well, we don't want to get into that, but it's all decided what they want you to think, and so you can only go there so many times before you start agreeing with whatever it is they come up with, and so that could be problematic, and extracting yourself from that mindset is also problematic, because then you have to go through the painful experience of cognitive dissonance, and a lot of people are experiencing that right now. There were things that they thought they believed in that they're finding are not true. And those that dig deeper and deeper find that it's even far more profound. When you realize that the teaching of history has been orchestrated for more than 100 years. Although all throughout history, I mean, history has been written by conquerors to support whatever regime that they have. We know that. I mean, it's the history of rich people lauding about the achievements of rich people, and so that's been its path for a long time. But when you get into the more recent hub of history, and I used to teach cultural history in a master's program, Waldorf master's program, and I just did it for a very short period of time. I found it fascinating, but I was kind of surprised at the kind of unreadiness that I found in young people, as if they'd never really, it was like it was a class they were taking because they had to do it to fill their portfolio. And so that's where education is today. It's like getting a piece of paper to make more money, and so that's not what we're doing here. Hopefully, we create giant question marks in all the people that happen to stumble on this humble effort that we have here, and that they go out and try and solve some of these riddles, these soft, unsolved riddles for themselves. But again, going back to these mysteries of the North, you get into how, in one legendary account, that the Siegfried, he slays the dragon. It was the dragon, the blood of the dragon, that gave him the ability to understand the language of the birds. And all of you know how much I like birds, and I think that they're very special. And in fact, Siegfried, or his disciple, who would later become Francis. Well, we know Francis had a very special relationship with birds too. And I used to have a statue of St. Francis with birds all over his shoulders in my yard, until it eventually fell apart from the bad weather. But it's a beautiful thing when you understand that you're continually in dialogue with nature and that you stay open to that understanding that there's a inner mystery that's the mystery of the East, and that's that inward Grail stream, and then you have that outside coming toward you from the cosmic realms and from nature, and that's the Arthurian and the mystery of Siegfried and the mysteries of the North, and it was such a mystery of adventure, and you look at it and you consider them most people look on Vikings like they're a bunch of bikers. I mean, what's up with these guys running around hoping to die in a battlefield? That's basically was their thing. But Rudolf Steiner says, well, they were still so clairvoyant at that time that in many regards the next world, the spiritual world, was the important one. That was more real to them than what was going on down here. And they dreaded the thought of dying in their sleep at home, that they wanted to be able to be taken to Valhalla with the Valkyrie. You know, it's like we can't even, most people can't even wrap their heads around what that might mean. But it's that whole understanding of the illusory nature of space and time and the world in which we live. And that can give you a great deal of freedom. Not that you're going to run around and be a Viking, but that you can understand that detachment that they had from the earthly realm, that they saw that the important thing was the courage that you brought and the clarity of understanding of the mysteries that you brought to your life, that was the important thing, and the integrity of your purpose, and that whole idea of being able to offer yourself at service towards that whole mystery of the spiritual world. And that was their dedication, and that's how they have to be understood, and that's why they're virtually impossible for modern day people almost to come to an understanding of, because they are so caught up in all those things that you described. That's all economic stuff, you know. That's all, where do I get some more money, you know? That's all about the money, you know. And Rudolf Steiner said that about the United States. He said one of the problems to be found in the United States is that if you look at the circumstances it was created under, that it was a commerce, that it was about commerce. That was the founding of our country, is based on commerce, is that they wanted to be able to not have the king dipping into their pockets every time they turn a corner, and that the other things that came into it, that was a result of the subtlety of the aspiration of the founding fathers, but the initial impetus was about commerce. And so that's the challenge that we're set with right now, and the powers that be. It's all this whole idea of the commercial endeavor, and that's the trouble that we're having right now, and the idea of the excessive forces of egoism that express in the world in selfishness. That's the dilemma that we're moving towards, and that's what leads to the war of all against all described in the apocalypse. That's that force of egoism that creates that battle of separation. And so we have to be able to be those, at least, that are striving to be able to embrace love and wisdom together, because wisdom without love can be very ruthless, and love without wisdom can be very reckless. And so if we could take that love and wisdom and bring them into the sacred marriage, the chemical marriage, and bring them together as fleur and blanche fleur, the rose and the lily, that can commingle together and bring out activity that's birthed out of the forces of conscience, then you're doing it. Even if you don't understand all the details, you could further unfold that relationship through, with me, it's continual repetition of the Lord's Prayer. I find that for me, that's what works for me. And that's where I want to go. I want to go where people think like that. And so that's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
That's a good story. Yeah, I hope my intention wasn't to veer towards politics. It really was. They were a series of grumpy economic realities that are covering the country at the minute, as opposed to anything else. I actually think the reasons why all these things are happening are very complex, and the reactions to it just show the level of education in Britain, sadly, which is not the fault of people; it's a fault in the system. Oh, Johnny, I love the Northern Mysteries. I love the fact that it comes out in certain types. They come out in certain types of transcendentalism. I love the fact echoes are found in Coleridge of the Northern Mysteries. You know, the glittering pole star, this sort of center of icy purity. I mean, that's wonderful. I mean, I tend to be more your sort of decadent sort of jungle paradise sort. I don't want to freeze my arse off, sorry, in the wild wilderness of the waste. I'm sorry. I want strawberry daiquiris on the beach, you know. But I respect those people that do want to do that. And every now and again, when it's a frost-covered night, even in London, and if you go to Trafalgar Square in the middle of the night, it has to be the middle of the night, or bloody people are still there, on a glittering frost-covered evening, it's like walking up and down the steps of heaven. Everything's sparkling with little stars. So I do understand the icy mysteries and the purity and the resoluteness and the strength and the hard quest. I do understand it. But I'd always say different horses for different courses. And also, it doesn't lead to a higher state than anybody else. That's something, I mean, I know loads of people with modern Viking horns. I'm just trying desperately to extricate myself. I know loads of people that think they're Vikings. You're not Vikings. You're not Vikings. You know, I know loads of people who are trying to recreate the Nordic outlook. You're not Vikings. I'm sorry. You know, I even know people in Iceland and Norway, and they bloody know you're not Vikings. So, you know, I mean, so, you know, we've got to be a little careful of these reconstructive activities. And, you know, why did the Viking invasions take place? For good, solid, hard economic reasons. If you actually look at those countries and those cultures, it was all driven by hard economics. Not really valor, although they did show a great deal of valor, I admit that. Yeah, and I like the intrepidness. What intrigues me is how that worldview, and I'm not weakening my links with heathenry or the heathen community. I think some of it is enticingly beautiful, intoxicatingly beautiful. But, you know, we do have to always remember different horses for different causes. We do have to remember what was going on in those cultures, and we do have to remember there are different ways to express these treasures, which leads me back to the transcendentalists. There are echoes of those treasures in the self-reliance of the transcendentalists, of the skepticism of the transcendentalists, and ironically, of the devotions of the transcendentalists. Some of that comes out very clearly in the early hippies. Some of them, I wrote something years back called The Children of Rousseau. I can't remember what it was, where I'm just saying, you know, they were the children of Rousseau. The trouble is, it's before time. It's a movement that's starting before time. It can't take root. That's a shame, but it can't. So, you know, you're looking at optimists being very rather like millennials at the minute, and there's nothing wrong with a bit of optimism, but I'm sorry, the cultural soil isn't there for these things to really flourish and thrive at the minute. It's just not working like that. I'm thinking of the books of Doris Lessing as I sit here. I'm a huge admirer of that old cow. She was rude to me once, but we'll get bloody woman. But she used to shoot from the hip, and she was a moody old what's it anyway. And it wasn't my fault. I was stood near the door at a book launch. I'm sorry, the room is packed. What do you want me to do? Float to the ceiling? Anyway, so but I'm thinking of her and that remarkable output, which is skeptical on the one hand, very, very feminist in an engaging way. I mean, it's laying ideologies and experiences on the table in a way very few other people have, very few others have. And I liked if this is the word I'm looking for, I liked the socialism of the early corpus. If that's what it is, I think if we revisit her work, it seems to be something quite different, actually. And I like the fact that she felt let down by the Soviet Union and was honest enough to say it, and then say, look, that phase of my work has gone, and now I'm looking at psychological materials. And I like the fact she was even engaged in science fiction at the end, because I include her type of spirit as very hippie. Forgive me for saying that. I mean, a friend of mine is Freya Aswin. My God, what an old hippie. I hope she never listens to this show. She'll never speak to me again. But darling, you're an old hippie, right? There were some wonderful northern resonances in those people. And it was re-articulated first in our time by the transcendentalists. They had me foxed for years. Why would people of such obviously higher consciousness, aesthetic consciousness, be against organized religion? Mind you, nowadays, after all the scars I've got, I can bloody see why. But they were young people, so they might have arrived at that too soon. But yeah, I mean, it's important to be skeptical of organized religions, but not religion. That the vehicle towards transcendence. That's something they were very clear about. And the fact they thought that getting on with your own life in your own terms was vital. I'm extrapolating a couple of things here. For collective peace, for social peace, for communal peace. I mean, your inner endeavor must be rewarding enough to be able to work with people peacefully. Being peaceful itself, of course, hides a dagger. You're harmless if you can't ever rise to violence or sink to violence, as I'd prefer as a pacifist. But if you're peaceful, you're saying, well, I can do that, but I'm choosing not to do that because that is better for the collective. It's better for the people around me. It's better for my own integrity. Integrity, of course, being one of the ultimate Viking northern values. I mean, if we're looking for panaceas, if we're looking for ways out of the problems we've got at the minute, I suspect they're staring us in the face, and it actually is to do with the glittering secrets of the North, and we need to revisit them very, very quickly. I'll hand it back to you, John.
Well, the actual tipping point is if you put somebody in a position to where they have nothing left to lose, you've put yourself in an awkward situation. And that's what's happening. And I'm just going to leave it at that those forces just tend to rise up. If you study the history of mankind, you'll see that that's when it occurred, when it got to the point to where people can say to themselves, what do I got to lose? I'm joining them. And you see, I have a wonderful book here. I don't want to dig it up right now, about how the Revolutionary War was really, that arose from the pulpit. That's where it came from. And the primary exponents of the Revolutionary War were they what they call them the Black Robe Legion, and I mean, it's a marvelous history that most people are absolutely oblivious to, but yet that's how it happened. And so it's going to be the people that treasure the Judeo-Christian culture of the West that are the ones that are going to be able to pull the iron out of the fire. Your socialists, that's just an intellectual pursuit. You see, there's no there. I mean, they have platitudes, but they borrowed most of their platitudes from religious literature, actually, and we have the advantage of having the spiritual world behind us, and maybe if they don't believe there is such a thing, you could see that they're really working from a privative, that they are coming from an absolute lack of basis. Because if you go to the pinnacles in philosophy, I mean, you got like Hegel and Fichte and Schelling, and these are all religious figures. And if you get into geez, you can get it. You can go down the whole row, and you'd be hard pressed to find an atheist amongst significant philosophers, other than a few handful of people that just try to treat it like it's a mathematical problem. But they got dashed on the rocks by our friend as in his Tractatus and his philosophic writings, and he ended up, saying that that there would be less of him and more of Christ. So there we are. The people that really are holding the balance of power in the current world situation are the people that are serving the spiritual world. That's the real mystery, and they like to make us think we're outnumbered, but you know what? We're not. There's a great many more of us, and we have the strength of conviction that arises from the pursuit of truth. I'm not going to say the possession of truth, because it's something that is so morphic. It's continually going through all of its various phases. But the fact of that you're striving and that you're attempting to do it, that gives you a power that, it's like I was explaining to my friend Joe, who ran for governor out on the East Coast some years ago. I said, never underestimate the power of 1,000 praying widows.
You have such a wonderfully eclectic group of friends. I counted one politico as a friend of mine, Lord Laird, who was this knighted Irishman, simply and a natural rebel. So I was bound to get on with him. How on earth did he get knighted? But he did. So yeah, I mean, I know lots of them. I maybe count one or two pass holders in the Lords, but not, as I think I said on this show before, not the Commons, because they stab you in the back to win the next local by-election. But that's politics. So, that would make a play, John. That would make a play. I think somebody probably done it though. Anyway, oh gosh, I think, but you're right. Politics is a sort of outward echo of much greater and deeper spiritual struggles. I mean, that's really what is motivating and empowering our discussions. The real core of all of this is, are we evolving or devolving? I suppose the answer is both. There's an overall forward motion of things fitting into place in the divine plan. But that doesn't mean things can't devolve as part of that process. What's happening in Britain at the moment is extraordinary on a cultural level. If you think, most of the big liberal innovations happened here and they're being dismantled here, that's bizarre. But as I say, for me, it reflects a much deeper war in literature. It reflects a much deeper war in theatre. It reflects a new type of aesthetic sense. I mean, I think I'm giving the impression on these shows that I'm against millennials, which I'm not. They embody a wonderful idealism, which is absolutely vital to the next generation, the future. My worry is that they're wonderfully young and they don't realize ideals tend to belong to a future time, because they won't be realized in our lifetime, like the great cathedrals. If the great cathedral builders of medieval Europe knew they wouldn't live to see the end of the cathedrals. They knew they wouldn't see the completed glory of these buildings, but that didn't stop them building it. They had the beauty of that edifice in mind, and they kept working and working and working. That's my worry about the modern millennial culture, if there is such a thing. It's a phrase buzzing around here at the minute, because they're not cathedral builders. They want everything here and now, but that's not the way life works, unfortunately. We live in a world of processes, and processes, by definition, take time. And that's not wrong. That's just the way things are. Did you ever see the movie Babe? That sort of saintly pig, which I absolutely loved it. It's a bit like Bambi, a porcine Bambi, with all these poor Babe, but you have the all-wise mice that seem to know everything and can comment on everything, and that's their view. It's just the way things are. We need a few more all-wise mice in our theatres at the minute and in our movies at the minute. We need a little less fantasy. I'm sorry to come back to that. We need a few less Avengers movies, and we need a few more thoughtful movies about what it means to be alive and where we're going. I can't remember. I was sat during your previous segment trying to remember a movie by Walter Matthau. I always was in two minds about Walter Matthau. I love American culture. I'd live there tomorrow with my partner if I got the chance. How can anyone hate a country where you get, what was his name? Jimmy Cagney dancing down the president's staircase singing I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy. How could you hate a country like that? How could you hate a country where Edward G. Robinson plays every gangster under the sun, but he's an aesthete in his private life? I mean, how can you hate any country like that? And all the ideals, some of which have been realized, and all the hopes and all the dreams. I don't see the end of the American dream. It really makes me sad that some Americans do. I don't see that at all. America's a new place. It's full of vital energies, and the future's golden. But like everything else, it's a process. And even Britain, I suppose. I'm trying not to be too negative about my own land. I think the Black Robed Army did something that couldn't be done here. That they gave people a vision of a higher and better life. I've read some of the sermons that were scattered around at that particular time, and they're beautiful. They're wonderful. And it always seems to be that we're human and we deserve a bit more than we've got. And what's wrong with that? Now, but that to me is the backbone of some incredible preaching. We need to recover that hopeful spirit, which is found outside maybe of the structures which are propounded at the moment. Of course, religion, there's an anti-religious feeling, anti-church feeling going around in Britain at the minute. I think Britain's a very spiritual country. It always is. It always remains that. I don't think it's a particularly religious country, and there's a decline happening in organized religion at the minute, for good or ill, which of course is mirroring the explosive decline of organized religion in America. I mean, I was looking at some of the figures recently pre-COVID, and I don't know, what does it strike me as? Are we looking at the destruction of an ideology? Of course not. We're looking at the reformation, the real reformation, the reformulation, the re-emergence, the connecting with the deepest possible values of love and wisdom once again, to remember the Christian vision. That's what's happening. And a Christian vision beyond churches just telling their congregants to swallow an ideology, turn up on a Sunday and spend their money when the collection plate goes around. Christianity has always been a giant and a colossus amongst angels, and it's on the verge of doing that again. On that, I agree with you 100%. What we're looking at is real reformation. I admire Martin Luther. I know lots of people do not. I regard him as very much a man of his time. I prefer Wesley amongst the Methodists, who strikes me being a different time frame. But I like the sort of moody Dr. Luther getting drunk with his mates on a Saturday night, which is why the times of the services used to get later and later on a Sunday. I like all that. I like him basically saying, look, what are we all trying to do? We're trying to do something that's already been done. We are saved. So what are we going to do about that? That is the sort of Christianity we've got to try and reach now, beneath the institutions underpinning these churches and denominations, and the reason they started such a glorious work 2,000 years ago in the first place. I'll hand it back to you.
Well, I'm reminded of back when our good friend Leo Zagami's taking Alex on a tour of the Vatican, and he starts taking him over to Jesuit headquarters to show him around. And a guard comes up to him, and Leo starts talking about Jesus, and the guard says, "We don't care about that here." And that's kind of in a nutshell of where a lot of it is. It's become the Vatican's become like this giant real estate firm, and so enough of that. It's too easy to pick on them. They've been embroiled in so many of the machinations, the worldly, ever so worldly machinations. If you look in the word ecclesia, what does that word mean? It means community. It really doesn't even mean church. It doesn't mean empire, for sure. It doesn't mean, anything like of a necessarily organized fashion, other than that it's attempting to try and create a context in the community for spiritual impulses to come about. And many of the Rudolf Steiner talks about how the spiritual institutions of the past have basically run out of momentum, and that mankind are going to have to give birth anew from their own voice of conscience, new spiritual impulses to take into the future. And so that's what we're seeing. Many people, they'll say, well, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. So that they do have that aspiration. And I guess in the final analysis, you go up to the pearly gates, St. Peter doesn't pull out a list of rules and check to see if you've memorized them. It becomes a question of what did you do? It's not what your philosophy was, or what what school of thought did you belong to. Again, I go back to that old joke. The guy dies, and his angel confronts him and is taking him down this long hallway, and you look and he says, well, there's the Methodist over there, and there's the Baptist, and they're walking down the hallway, and then they come to this door and it's closed. And he says, what's that about? And the angel says, well, that's the Catholics. They think they're the only ones up here. And so I always get a chuckle out of that, because that speaks volume. And like what I said, I'm with Goethe. I'm a Hipsisterian. I'm all for anybody who's coming up with something positive, whether it be from a Christian source, Hebraic source, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, paganism. I really don't care. I think that beauty arises from that whole idea of the good, the true, and the beautiful that can manifest in so many different forms and shades, and it's different in different cultures, and I find that beautiful. Is there an ugliness that can associate? Well, there can be no beauty without ugliness. That's the tragedy, and it's a tragicomedy. What is the symbol of the theater? It's the two faces. One is smiling and one is frowning. So that that's the world in which we live, and like what you said, that's just the way it is. It's that somebody necessarily, the reason you can't have it today isn't because necessarily somebody didn't do something for you. It's that's just the world in which we live. As Novalis, the great poet Novalis, said, paradise is strewn everywhere. And what does he mean by that? He means it's all here, but you need a new putter, but the new putter you need to complete your golf set is over in the store, and you don't have the money to buy it. So paradise is strewn everywhere. That putter does exist, but you don't have one. And so we have to kind of look at that, and we have to learn to try and open a space in our hearts to where this voice of conscience, still small voice, becomes the voice we're listening to. And I fear that people are getting into that loud, angry voice, and they're going to lose touch with that voice of conscience. And so I just precaution everybody just to stay calm, just to let these things play. You'll find that when you get past a certain period of time, that the storms can pass. Not that you don't do anything, but I'm with Henry David Thoreau. His whole concept of social disobedience, that you don't have to participate in things that you don't think are right. And I think he was the inspiration for Gandhi. He was the inspiration for Martin Luther King. He was the inspiration for a great many people. And like I shared last week, when he got thrown in jail, he's sitting in jail, and Ralph Waldo Emerson walks up and goes, "David, what are you doing in there?" And Henry David Thoreau says to Emerson, "What are you doing out there?" So it becomes a point at which you have to make a decision, because it's what you do. It's not your theory that finds the resolution in the final analysis.
Oh my God, this is turning into a theological discussion. Angry voices, yeah, if they're looking for trouble, then they've come to the right place. I can't remember the rest of that song, you'll have to forgive me. Oh yeah, there are too many angry voices nowadays, but actually I'm not very optimistic. That will shock everybody. Because of what you said earlier, there were too many. My trouble with idealism, and why I got interested in things like existentialism and personalism, too many people are left out of the ideal. You become the perfect German, or you become the perfect Chinese guy. All right, and how many are you? How many of there are you? Even in Japan, I mean, one of the things of that incredible culture. Oh, I'd love to work with the Japanese. I hope you're listening. The imperfections are discouraged in Japan. Oh no, under Edo, it all starts in Edo, where everything becomes stylized and colourful and dramatic and like a gigantic operatic set. And the poetry is the same as well. It all starts there, but hang on. Most of us are imperfect in some way or another. So we're all left out then. I think we've got to piecemeal all of this, as opposed to, the ideal's there, but the minute you want people living up to it, something's gone wrong. We are not the archetypes. The archetypes are the archetypes, and the archetypes are probably angels or demigods, but we are not them. We could admire them and we can dialogue with them, but we are not them. We are human. AI and all this nonsense. As I said before, I'll believe in AI the minute I can have a row with a droid. Ha! That's not going to happen in the immediate future, is it? AI, they're playing a clever game, and because they need funding and they're getting massive amounts of funding compared to everybody else. But somebody sent me I can't resist preaching on Facebook. I'm sorry. Somebody sent me a meme during the week about how we're 30 years away from holographic people walking the streets. I couldn't help reposting it, saying, aren't there enough fake people around at the minute without adding more to the streets? For God's sake, this is ridiculous. It's all to do with wanting to rush the process. Dare I say that? The process is the process. It goes at its own pace. It's the process of the angels. It's not ours. We're participants in it, but we're not the makers of it. We've got to just find our place and, dare I say, do the one thing that nobody wants to: become fully human. That's why I like the Simone de Beauvoirs, the Jean-Paul Sartres. I like Pope John Paul. He was actually a very interesting personalist writer. I like all of them reflecting on error. I like all of them talking about what goes wrong, the minute, the annoying, the pain in the arse. I love all of it, because all of a sudden, when you've put the novel down or you've read the poem 1,000 times and you look at the night sky and see the immeasurable distances in glorious space between glittering galaxies and stars, all of a sudden that is a religious vision. It's not a vision of hopelessness. It's not a vision of despair. It's not something making you anxious. You have actually tasted for the first time the mysterium tremendum. Therefore, religion is beginning to come into your life in a way no church service, or very few of them, no sermon, or very few of them, no attendance at mass, or very few of them, no Protestant let's all get together and bore each other to death, with exceptions. Let's not forget Protestant Christianity is also collapsing. You don't get off the hook. Why are all these things happening? Because they've lost love and wisdom. They've lost the core of what Christianity is all about, and they've become my beloved Kierkegaard's Christendom, a caricature, a permanent caricature of what they were meant to be in the first place. I mean, I seem to remember in those days, of course, in Denmark, there was a religious law, a religious tax. If you didn't go to church on a Sunday, you were taxed, you were fined. And what my wonderful Kierkegaard used to do was sit outside on the church porch reading Sunday newspapers to make his point, but refusing to go in. I mean, that's a Christian attitude. That's a Christian attitude. We've all got Wittgenstein. I keep going. Yes, I know. I'm proselytizing Ludwig again. What can I do? The most mystical atheist that ever lived. I mean, apart from the fact he went around telling his students to read St. Paul, which horrified everybody in Oxford, which isn't a mean feat in itself. And the fact they've all got to become more like Christ and less like themselves. I mean, that's radical. The fact that it came out a couple of years ago that, was it during the early days of the war, he had a series of mystical experiences and used to say incredible things like, what is the mystery? Mystery isn't something the world is pointing to. Mystery is the fact the world exists at all. That's the mystery. And all of a sudden, if you sit down there with that thought, that's an existential thought, that's a personalist thought, and it's mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Why are we here? Why is anything here? And that is the re-arising of the mysterious tremendum. I can't remember the last time I went into a church and apart from mine, that I went into a church and anything like that happened. I mean, let's have a pot shot at the Anglicans before I round off and give it back to John. It's all very civilized. It's all very nice. We all turn up, excuse me, sing a few hymns, have a nice get together, take Holy Communion, because of course they don't really do mass. That's not what they're about. And then you have fellowship afterwards, and nobody seems transformed at all. So what's it all been about? What's been the point? Has anybody been stretched into anything, found anything truer? Has anyone found any deeper knowledge, any soul, any spiritual, anything more beautiful? Actually, largely no. And isn't that a terrible shame? I see John has disappeared from my screen, which is also a terrible shame, because it makes me deeply nervous that he won't come back on and I'll be left spouting, which is not something I want to do, about anything I can think of before he recurs. The side of my screen where he should be has just reappeared, but his image has not. So I'm tempted now to lapse into a medley of songs.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see you, my friend.
I'm sorry I did that. I had to look for your books.
Oh,
they were right next to me.
oh.
Let me try I'll exit and come back.
Okay, and that gives me a chance to talk about the Nephilim Anthropology Conference, which is happening next, excuse me, Saturday at the Royal Asiatic Society. I have the honour of being elected as a fellow. There are online tickets. How about this for shameless? The minute he's off the screen. There are online tickets if you can't join us in person. If you've got the chance, come along. It's just past Euston Station. Come along and see us. The first in at least a 3-year-long project, talking about everything we can think of, from biblical interpretations of Nephilim, the new anthropology, which of course is quite a scientific view about human origins, a revisioning of human origins, all the way through to ufology, whatever that actually means. I'm always confused about that. You know, sci-fi, giants, weird stuff, Pomo. I like a bit of Pomo. I like a bit of weird stuff. Nordic mythology, we've got a bit of that there. We've got wonderful explorers who've actually been to places like Easter Island and all those mysterious Aruba caves, where apparently there is evidence of giants and giantism to this day. So why not join us and get a different point of view towards these incredible mysteries? The unique feature of this panel is that we do start from the Bible, but we don't limit ourselves, if limit is the correct word, to a particular type of discourse surrounding Judeo-Christianity. We try and look at the evidence, we try and look at the phenomena from every single angle imaginable, in the hope that we can begin to make sense of it. I think that's actually worth doing. A shameless plug, and I think John is now starting to manifest the other side of the screen. Again, I can see your John Barnwell 888, but I can't see your wonderful visage.
Well, I believe that the viewers can see me. If somebody could tell me if I am visible, that would be very helpful, because at this point I can see both of us.
Right, I can see my own self and my PayPal.
But there might just be like a circle showing here. Yes, they could see. That's what I thought. Okay, so we're fine.
Right, I'll deal with that.
Your lack of technological skill that's putting you at a disadvantage there, Reverend David. Well, Reverend David William Parry is a very talented author, and here's his Shakespearean study, The Grammar of Witchcraft. And that's not a how-to on witchcraft, but a Shakespearean study. And then you have his Shakespearean as Poetry, Caliban's Redemption, and his main work. And he has a new book coming up, by the way, eventually. Oh, David just disappeared on me. And but his principal work is Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts, edited by the very talented Daniela Irendust, and I can bring him back in here. And his books are available on Amazon, and well worth reading. He's a very skilled writer. And for myself, I have 2 books, although most of the people that are here right now are probably painfully aware of that fact. But here we have my first work, The Arcana of the Grail Angel, the Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar, the True Rosicrucian Order, with a foreword by Douglas J. Gabriel of American Intelligence Media. Some 640 pages, loaded with diagrams, and it gives you an approach to unlock the secrets of spiritual science, or the anthroposophy of Rudolf Steiner. And all those diagrams are repeated in my second book, again with a whole bunch of additional diagrams, the Grail diagrams, and I lay out the cosmology as extensively as I can in my books. And that's meant to be tools. Rene Corrido, the great student of Walter Stein, called my first book a compendium, and I think that's a great description of it. It can help one pull all the various threads of spiritual science together and attempt to weave a storyboard to be able to come to a deeper understanding. And ultimately, you can get my books on the eBay here in the U.S. If you're outside the U.S., you can contact me directly through my academia link that's shown below, or you can contact me by private message on Facebook, and I'd be happy to make out arrangements for you if you're outside the country. And that's worked out a great many times with no problems. And so ultimately, also, if you want to buy us cups of coffee, I'm grateful to the people that have in the past, or tea. You could buy tea. That's paypal.me/D Parry 777 for Reverend David, and for myself, that's paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And so much for that. Also, it would be very helpful if on YouTube that you would click on the like button and subscribe to my channel, and you'll get updates and all that. But it won't be too pestering because I only do 1 or 2 things a week normally, although I'm planning on generating more content because I noticed that there's a shortage of certain quality works that have long gone out of print, and I'm thinking of sharing some of those with my reading skills, if they are such. And so that's something I'm looking at doing. Some of the works of Novalis and Goethe and some of these people need to be represented more so. They are definitely in possession of thoughts of value as we move into the future. And so I don't think I left anything out. I also want to thank my 2 sponsors, Vadim and Tyla, without which this channel would not have been able to continue. And oh, by the way, David, I had eye surgery the other day, so I'm not as blind as I was last week, and it's on the mend. Couldn't afford to do it, but I guess I couldn't afford not to do it. And so let's look forward. That's kind of a little birthday present for myself, with my birthday coming up tomorrow. Not that that's of importance to anyone, but it just reminds me how many rotations I've been around. It's like amazing. I feel like Father Time at this point, but that's okay because I think that I'm learning more and more every day, especially hanging out with such great souls like Reverend David William Parry. And by the way, if you'd like to give us your thoughts, concluding to sum up things, and you could lead us into a prayer to kind of consecrate this endeavor.
I think it's good that you're having the cataract things done. That really is a birthday present. I've got to go to a company called Specsavers for my yearly checkup soon. I know they're forming, but I'm not there. I'm not there yet. My own joy, as we were laughing before the show began about the golden years, is probably needing hormone injections to both knees. Let's hear it. Let's hear it. So. Oh my God! It's rapidly turning into a medical show, some sort of medical sitcom. Yeah, I mean, I think basically I'll have to become pastor. I think technically I am pastoring, but I think my congregation want me to go by the nom de plume, by the epithet pastor. So we don't have to work on that one. Oh no, where do I go with all this? This show is a treasure. It's unique. We're trying to not only talk about great writers and great movements in culture, we're also looking for the archetypal underpinning behind them and focusing on truth. I mean, one of the biggies, let's face it. And I don't think these discussions, these deliberations are getting nowhere. If people expect some sort of mathematical equation, they've probably missed the point anyway. Life isn't reducible to a series of algorithms. Sorry, nerds of the world, but there we are. You've just got to live with it. As valuable as they are, there's more to life than a series of mathematical formulae. Speaking of more to life, I mean, in gloom set Britain, let's think of the jolly, let's think of the merry, let's think of the fun, let's think of all those things that need to be remembered to make the transition from the end of summer. And I've always loved the autumn more than anything else, where everything's reached fruition, where everything's lush and luxuriant. I mean, again, I'm not, I love the mysteries of the North, but I'm sorry, I'm a quisling, I'm a defector. I love the lush and the abundant. I think that's much better. And let's remember that external abundance is really only a reflection of the abundance within ourselves. My criticism of all of the churches is that they forgot to preach the one thing that is necessary. We're searching for the inner light of Christ. That's what it's all about. Please remember, my friends, either on YouTube or on social media, wherever this show goes out, that you're not simply a leaf being blown around by various economic and political winds. You're a child of the universe, and you're the beloved of Christ. You are part of that light and that glory and that ineffable beauty. Be at peace, be at joy, and remember, as John Bunyan said, be of good cheer, friends, because all is well. Amen.
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 Thank you so much. And thank everybody for coming to our little chat. And we'll see you again next week.